So for our first keynote speaker, Dr. Park, her life and research passion including contemplative practices, chaplaincy education, the elderly and spirituality, women's leadership, and integrative, embodied, and critical pedagogies in the last decade, Dr. Park, a lifelong Presbyterian, turned towards Buddhist practice in Thich Nhat Hanh Palm Village tradition. She is the spiritual director grounded in contemplative traditions. Her topic today is a chaplains as meaning makers. Let's welcome Dr. Park. Please come to the stage.
Thank you. I want to first thank the Tzu Chi Foundation, Dr. He, CEO Lin, and our esteemed colleagues gathered here for this wonderful opportunity to learn and share wisdom together across geopolitical national boundaries. I believe that this kind of wisdom sharing across cultures and contexts is crucial for understanding this emerging field of chaplaincy studies. And I bring greetings from Union Theological Seminary on behalf of the President, Serene Jones. She is delighted that Professor Snyder and I are visiting and learning from the Tzu Chi Foundation and exploring possible partnerships and collaborations. Over the last few days, we've had the privilege to witness and learn about this inspiring work of Tzu Chi. And I see the urgency of providing spiritual care alongside humanitarian aid, medical services, and education. I look forward to our conversation together this morning. So before I begin my formal remarks, I want to first contextualize my work. Working with chaplains and students training to be chaplains in a primarily Christian context of the United States, I recognize the difference in the approach and the religious framework in which this education takes place. Union Theological Seminary is historically a Protestant seminary with deep roots and ethos of Christianity that values justice commitments, which also pervade the curriculum and the culture of the institution. And even with the good work of my colleague here, Professor Snyder, who teaches Buddhist studies, and Professor Jerusha Rhodes, a professor of Islam, our institution struggles with what it means to train Buddhist chaplains through the container or framework of interreligious engagement in a historically Protestant seminary. So I want to first name that reality. The faculty and the board as a whole is committed to this move towards interreligious engagement and would like to see the study of Buddhism, Islam, and other religious traditions not as an additive to the Christian-centered curriculum, but as an interstitial connective tissue that invites the exploration of how religious traditions are formed and changed as they come in contact with each other. As such, I invite other presenters here this morning to engage my presentation from your own contexts and perspectives, and maybe perhaps explore together the resonances, the differences, and how we might create new interstitial connective tissues in the field of chaplaincy education and chaplaincy studies. While an academic discipline of, say, pastoral theology or spiritual care and counseling has been firmly established in the US, the field of chaplaincy as a discipline of study is fairly new. In the last decade, there has been a concerted effort by interdisciplinary scholars of spiritual care, practical theologians, sociologists, medicine, and health researchers to advance the research methods in chaplaincy and to promote religious literacy among healthcare professionals. George Fitchett and Wendy Cadge are two such leaders in this work. And organizations like Transforming Chaplaincy and the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab have taken up the task of bringing together chaplains, chaplain educators, and researchers to create a central hub to understand the emerging and rapidly changing landscape of chaplaincy. The shape-shifting and expanding nature of chaplaincy requires us to pay close attention to how chaplaincy manifests itself, especially in the US. And I invite you to consider your own context of Taiwan and Tzu Chi worldwide to see if there are connections. In the US, as chaplains become more diverse in terms of religion and worldviews, so too the contexts where they work. There are chaplains at the airport, college and universities, fire and police departments, prisons, hospitals, hospices, nursing homes, social service agencies, family services, military installations, labor unions, businesses, seaport, racetracks, truck stops, movement spaces like Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, and Standing Rock, and on online and mobile app like Venly. As an aside, I am thinking about protest movements in Asian contexts, like the nonviolent candlelight vigils in South Korea in 2017 that demanded the impeachment of President Park Geun-hye, or the Yellow Umbrella movement in Hong Kong that demanded fair and free elections. And it made me wonder if there were movement chaplains involved and present in those protests. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought chaplains to the front line of the battle in ways that demystify their roles and made them highly visible. In 2020 to 2021, many news outlets covered stories about chaplains, their work, their commitments, and their lives as the pandemic altered how people were cared for, died, processed grief and loss, and ritualized death. The chaplain's role, along with healthcare professionals, was at the center of the pandemic. Chaplaincy has become one of the most sought-after concentration for study for students at Union since then. The changing nature of chaplaincy is both the product of and the impetus for the changing religious landscape of the United States. With an increasing number of Americans claiming spiritual, not religious, or nuns or duns with organized, institutionalized religion, chaplaincy is changing in response to the larger movement to reorganize religious life as we know it. More people are seeking spirituality outside of the institutional faith communities, bringing religion into public and often secular spaces. However, within the spaces that traditionally might have been regarded as secular, many are seeking deep spiritual heritage and training and connection. The current embodiment of spiritual practice regularly defies the traditional categories of religious heritage. Navigating this often conflicted space, chaplains have become, and I quote, the priests of the secular, or 21st century's indispensable ministers without portfolio. And currently, chaplaincy in the US is developing in two seemingly conflicting directions. First, in an effort to move towards professionalization, standardization, and certification, chaplaincy is becoming more regulated by the state via degree and certificate granting bodies. Secular institutions in which chaplains work are likewise highly regulated. Religious traditions engaging chaplaincy in the US are increasing, complicating the formal process of training and certification. So what does the increasing interreligious complexity of chaplaincy education mean when many of the assumptions in the professionalization, standardization, and certification process remain mainly, at least culturally, Protestant Christian? Second, chaplaincy is proliferating in new contexts previously unimagined, such as protest movements like, as I mentioned earlier, Black Lives Matter or Standing Rock. In these contexts, chaplains are organized on an ad hoc and temporary basis through organically and more loosely formed networks and through social media. These movement spaces are also becoming deeply interreligious. Chaplains varying training is democratizing chaplaincy in a way. And while all the competencies of skillful, trauma-informed chaplain are needed in these fast-changing and turbulent spaces, there is no certifying body that credentials such chaplains. That they are highly unregulated raises further questions about effective forms of education. So as regulators, how do we maintain the standards so critical to accountability while creating space for new forms of chaplaincy to emerge? As professional colleagues, how do we support the solid work of traditional chaplaincy and incubate experimentation like chaplaincy through mobile apps? As educators, how do we create a pedagogy that allows so many meaningful religious differences to endure while cultivating the possibility for connections across those differences? In this emerging territory, how do we take seriously all these connections and provide a formal education that lays a foundation for this work? And such questions inform Union Theological Seminary's Master of Divinity program that aims to train chaplains in general and Buddhist chaplains in particular with the interreligious perspectives, interpersonal, self-inquiry, spiritual care, justice commitments, and meaning-making competencies necessary to flourish in this quickly changing world. So allow me to reflect briefly on the COVID-19 pandemic experience in New York City, which in some sense feels like eons ago, and yet a sense of doom and gloom still lingers. It haunts us. And I want to quote from an opinion piece in the New York Times by reporter Bari Weiss, dated April 3rd, 2020. You may remember this is when New York City was deep and thick in the paralysis of contagion, sickness, and death. This was when 8.5 million New Yorkers were afraid to go out, talk with neighbors, connect with family and friends, and even to breathe. Bari Weiss starts her piece this way. Few run toward the dying. Even fewer run toward the contagious. But chaplains do. They ministered to the sick before this pandemic turned their hospitals into war zones. And they will do so after this plague subsides. Doctors and nurses focused on healing the physical. Chaplains are there for everything else. They are men and women from every religious background and none. Their job is not to convert or to convince people to believe in God. Some don't believe in God. Their job is to be present with people in their suffering. Theirs is a ministry of presence. The essential work of chaplaincy remains the same, to facilitate connection between patients and doctors, patients and families, patients and God. Chaplains run toward the dying. Chaplains run toward the contagious when everyone else flee. Chaplains run toward suffering. They respond to suffering. The fact that they respond is the impetus that drives all helping professions. And the work of the chaplain is not just in the doing, but also in the being and reflecting. The doing has to be followed by deep, prayerful, thoughtful analysis and reflection so that their doing can improve. The non-linear, circular movement of praxis, action, reflection, action, forms the facilitating connective work of chaplains. This work helps to make meaning in the face of random and sudden trauma or disaster. One of the chaplains quoted in that same New York Times article said, "I actually think that when people are in their most broken places, they have the most honest conversations, and they're most open. Their hearts are open. Their families are open. Sometimes pain brings people together." And this is the meaning-making work of chaplains. So to explore this meaning-making capacity of chaplains, I use Richard Osmer's four-question frame of practical theology. 1, first we ask, what is going on? That's the descriptive task. And we might ask, why is it going on? The interpretive task. What should be going on? The normative task. And finally, how do we respond? The pragmatic task. While they seem to be in chronological and linear order, in real life and real time, these questions overlap and circle back on each other. So what is going on can often be interchanged with why is it going on and what should be going on. But it is helpful as we discuss this to tease out these questions as we listen to those who seek our care. So this is a heuristic. This is one way of listening to people who are asking for our care. These 4 things. What is going on? Why is it going on? What should be going on? And how do we respond? So I will be framing the rest of my presentation with these 4 questions. What is going on? The descriptive task here. Carrie Doring, in her work, The Practice of Pastoral Care, a Postmodern Approach, frames the work of spiritual care in a narrative approach. In this approach, spiritual care begins with, and I quote, stepping respectfully and compassionately into another's narrative world, and develops by mingling the care seekers and caregivers' narrative world that generates an intersubjective space for meaning making. In other words, entering into narrative world with each other helps facilitate meaning making. With compassion and hospitality, the caregiver is invited, and caregiver I mean the chaplains are invited to enter into care seekers' narrative world. Through this inherently relational process, both parties, chaplain and the care seekers, are changed. The intersubjective space is where meaning and wisdom are co-created, created together between the chaplain and the care seeker, out of the intermingling and braiding of care seekers and caregiver stories, spoken and unspoken. So this intersubjective space is created through deep and respectful listening of not only the words, but of body language. They listen not only with their ears, but also with the ears of their heart, as they attune to what is being communicated somatically. Is there stress, anger, sorrow, or calm? Also, by matching the posture and tone of voice to that of care seekers, chaplains signal that they're being seen and heard. In times of crisis, when care seekers are overwhelmed with emotion, chaplains practice non-anxious presence through their voice and posture to communicate a sense of calm and confidence It de-escalates the intensity of emotions. And through grounding practices, chaplains too learn to calm their own nervous systems so that they can communicate a sense of calm and safety to those who they serve. In doing so, they establish resonances with the care seekers, which is foundational for the ministry of presence, creating a sense of safety, trust, and connection. Why is it going on? This is the interpretive task. Consider this quote by Eboo Patel. A narrative identity is a careful selection and stringing together the moments and events that matter for a particular purpose. It's an act of intentional interpretation and meaning-making. There is a selection going on here, and there is a purpose or goal for that selection, and there is intention. It's not accidental how we curate our identity. We curate moments and events that matter to construct meaning and thus an identity. We interpret life events. We cultivate capacities for understanding what is happening. This is fundamental to being human. We use symbols, stories, rituals, and traditions to make meaning. We filter our meaning through our contexts and meaning-making systems, whether they are cultural, religious, or ideological. The descriptive task of what is going on in conversation with the normative task of what should be going on is instructive. So, for example, when the practice is wrong, norms can correct and guide the practice. When the norms are reified, the practice can disrupt and interrogate the norms. They are dialogically related. So as chaplains, we help care seekers understand how their emotional reactions to shame, fear, guilt, and anger hold together the meaning-making system formed in childhood by family and social systems and accompanying values, beliefs, and ways of coping. And we ask the question, is it life-giving or is it life-limiting? If it is life-limiting, how might the chaplain compassionately and collaboratively highlight the destructive power of the life-limiting meaning-making system and accompany the care seeker toward liberative exploration? How might the chaplain remind the care seeker of the life-giving resources that the care seekers have access to and accompany them in that exploration? The chaplains listen carefully to assess the level of spiritual distress. Kenneth Parkman developed the criteria to assess positive and negative religious or spiritual coping. Many coping mechanisms are not readily conscious. They have been formed by our culture, religious and spiritual traditions, familial and community contexts. They are implicit, they are embodied, they are habituated, and escape our rational, logical mind. So it is through careful, deep listening that chaplains are able to assess how the care seeker is coping in crisis. Here are some key themes to listen for. Sense of connectedness to the sacred sources of spirituality. We listen to the care seekers with these questions in mind. Is there an anchor beyond themselves? Do they have a religious or spiritual community that can support their coping? Do they have practices, texts, art, and music, or other ways of engagement that they turn to when they're in crisis? How do their sacred texts and traditions help them in their distress and shed light in the meaning in their lives? How have they helped in the past? How might they help now? 2, sense of connectedness with family, friends, and social world. We listen with these questions in mind. What are the key relationships for this person? Do they have communities they belong to that offer a sense of belonging and meaning for their lives? How do these communities show up as we listen to the stories they tell as they make meaning of their lives. 3, sense of values and how these values provide orientation, determine goodness and truth in the person's life, and guide their choices and actions. So we listen with these questions in mind. What does a person value most? How does the care seeker's life reflect those values? Are there congruences? 4, a level of risk of harm to self. For all helping professions, it is important to be skilled in screening for suicide assessment and other self-harming behaviors. Do they have a history of self-harm or thoughts of self-harm? If so, how regularly do they have these behaviors? While a chaplain's main responsibility is to assess how spiritual coping either increases or decreases the risk of self-harm, listening for purpose, meaning, and sense of belonging in life are key spiritual indicators of assessing suicide risk. Now, how do we respond? This is a pragmatic task. What do chaplains do as meaning makers? I want to explore how they respond in 3 concrete ways. 1, meaning making in liminal and transition times and spaces. 2, meaning making in face of suffering. And 3, meaning making in pluralistic society. So first, meaning making in liminal and transition times. While meaning making often happens in sharing our stories, such as listening to the narrative identity we have curated for ourselves, during liminal, transition, and boundary situations, rituals have the efficacy and power to provide the stability, mark sacred time and space, remember and reveal, nurture resiliency, and empower and inspire new visions of freedom from affliction. In these liminal moments of life transitions like birth, significant birthdays, marriage, death, adoption, divorce, leaving home to attend school, graduations, and boundary situations like entering into a new relationship, receiving terminal illness diagnosis, begin caring for aging parents, and other such situations, chaplains are called to offer rituals to help make meaning during those liminal and boundary spaces. Secondly, meaning making in face of suffering. Some psychological research on suffering distinguishes suffering from pain. They say suffering is pain that is not understood, not comprehended. Pain that has no perceived meaning leads to suffering. I would nuance this to add that the pain that is comprehended through a life-limiting meaning-making system that leads to even more attachment and grasping would lead to more suffering. So meaning-making needs to disrupt our fixation on pain and not reinscribe it as essential identification of the person. Suffering can also arise when there is a rupture of meaning, when the understanding of oneself, community, and world is shaken up by crises, traumatic, and randomly unpredictable events, life seems meaningless. And people ask why questions in the face of life's fragility. And in oppressive, humanizing systems like the prison and living in poverty, there is a slow grounding down of that thus destroys a sense of self-belonging and purpose. This also leads to suffering. I was giving 3-minute notice. I'm going to read a little bit fast. Chaplains in these spaces of human suffering are witnesses to what is and witnesses to what it can be with renewed meaning and purpose toward healing and liberation. They listen for stories, practices, symbols, values, beliefs that undergird the stories that are told. They diagnose spiritual distress that is experienced when meaning-making system gets stuck and fragmented. And through attentive and compassionate listening, the care seekers can begin to reconstruct new meaning, reclaim sense of urgency, agency, and identity. This is my last point, and I'll wrap it up. Meaning making in a pluralistic society. Chaplains are called upon to provide spiritual care in pluralistic settings. It is imperative that chaplains do not impose their own beliefs or religious practices on care seekers who have differing religious orientations. While most effective chaplains are those who are firmly grounded in their spiritual and religious traditions, they listen carefully to the care seeker's values, frameworks, and spirituality in providing spiritual care. Chaplains engage in meaning-making across cultural worldviews, spiritual and religious differences. They learn to translate in order to support the meaning-making. Having spiritual and religious literacy of different religious traditions enables them to both offer particular practices in the language of care seekers' diverse religious backgrounds, as well as build a broader spiritual language and practice that build on commonalities rather than differences. In each of these three ways, the chaplains support the meaning-making. The chaplain need to understand their own complex and multiple identities, the bias, privilege, and power dynamics inherent in helping relationships, and limits their capacities when to refer to other professionals. So, in summary, chaplains engage care seekers in the spiritual need during crisis or liminal life events to provide care. This ministry of presence, as it has been described, is laden with meaning-making engagements. By considering the descriptive, interpretive, normative, and pragmatic fourfold questions: what is happening, why is it happening, and what should be happening, and what should we do, chaplains help those seeking to alleviate suffering through meaning-making capacity. In these ways, they provide spiritual care by stepping respectfully and compassionately into another's narrative worlds. By mingling the care seekers and caregivers' narrative world, they develop an intersubjective space for meaning-making. Chaplains run toward the dying. They run toward the contagious. Chaplain's job is to be present with people in their suffering. Theirs is a ministry of presence. Thank you.